Welcome to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Today I continue the discussion of Stalin's rule in Russia, and today is one of the most difficult and most tragic pages of Russian history, and that is the Great Terror, the terror campaign that Stalin launched in 1934 and that continued to 1938-39. So briefly, what is it all about? The Great Terror is a period of history that refers to the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of people, deportation and exile after a very short 5-minute trial of hundreds of thousands. To be exact, the recent research shows that in 1937, 900,000 people were executed and about 5 million people were arrested, and then the rest of them were deported to the Gulag, to the camps for the enemies of the people, for the relatives of the enemies of the people, the labor camps, the common criminal camps, all kinds, the Gulag Empire that was described so well by Solzhenitsyn. Now, who were the victims? The Great Terror victims were mostly communists, the Bolsheviks. They were mostly administrative apparatus, the military, the industrial elite. This was the first time that Stalin hit his own political parties, the so-called Bolsheviks or Communist Party, and I'll later discuss why. Was that the first time? Were there any precedents? Yes, this is very important. Just a few years earlier, and you can see my previous videos about that, there was a Dekulakization campaign that also had hundreds of thousands of kulaks shot, executed, and over 5 million people deported to Siberia. Now, this is, of course, a key event that, in a sense, is connected with the Great Terror because it generated a lot of protests and discussions that I will mention later. But more importantly, there was a similar precedent before that, during the Civil War, and again, you can watch my videos, the Red Terror. The similar thing was going on. The Bolsheviks attacked the Russian educated society, the aristocracy, the intelligentsia, the workers' opposition parties, the socialists, the Mensheviks, the cadets, everybody. And Dzerzhinsky, the head of the Cheka, ordered to trace in the archival documents anybody from any party who had ever been elected to any public office beginning from 1905. And then all of these people were arrested and gotten rid of through all kinds of fabricated accusations. So Bolsheviks operated with this kind of a attack by class or by category of social strata without any regard to personal guilt or not. So the terror of 34-36 is nothing new. Of this Great Terror begins right after the murder of Kirov in he was killed in 1934 in December, and this next period begins in 1935 and goes through 36. And I call that period revenge of Stalin against the old Bolsheviks. So this was briefly, Kirov was killed because he was too much in favor of peace with the opposition, because he resisted execution of Ryutin, a true oppositionist, and old Bolshevik. All of that is in my previous video on Kirov. But now the first stage, which opens up with the trial of Kamenev and Zinoviev, and then the second stage of that is the Piatakov and other Trotskyist trial. So these trials are very well covered in literature, but the key thing here is that they are just the tip of an iceberg. The trials were a show off. There are lots of literature on this. There was a script. They were tortured, they were beaten, and they were forced to call names, and they were forced to admit all kinds of nonsense about the Trotskyist Center and the Leningrad Center and the United Opposition Center. All this is total fabrication made up by the NKVD on Stalin's personal instructions, with the purpose of to humiliate these old Bolsheviks and to force them to name names so that he could go after others. Why did he do this? Well, briefly, these are the revenge is based on the following. Number one, Because he remembered that in the 1922, Zinoviev told him once, "You, Koba," which was a party name of Stalin, "don't know much about Marxism, you better just shut up." So he could never forgive this, because in his mind, these people considered themselves to be true intellectuals, true Marxists, who could actually discuss the theory of Marxism and Leninism and all this, and they considered him to be an inferior, kind of a Georgian bandit, and he never could forgive this or forget this. So in that sense, that is the revenge to the old intelligentsia types of the Bolshevik Party. Number two reason is that they talk too much. They considered seriously to remove him from office in 1923 because of Lenin's testament, and in 1926 when he prevailed over the opposition, and most importantly in 1932 when he wanted to execute Rutin for his famous Rutin platform that gathered a lot of support and a lot of reading in the communist circles, and they didn't let him get rid of Rutin. They voted against his execution because they were afraid to start executing Bolsheviks. So he couldn't forget any of this, and this is why he said this is 4 years too late. 32 plus 4, that's 36, when he actually started doing what he wanted to do back in 1932. He had absolutely paranoid fear of Trotsky, because Trotsky was his superior intellectually. Trotsky was a great orator and Stalin was not. Trotsky could do all kinds of things that Stalin could not. The only thing that Stalin did better is manipulation behind the scenes and replacing people quietly with his own obedient servants and murderers. But by the summer of 36, Stalin realized he could get away just about anything. All these people admitted their guilt after torture and beatings in the NKVD. And so he wants now to recast the party and make it into his obedient servant rather than deal with the old Bolsheviks. So to do that, he has a very well orchestrated campaign and a plan. And the plan consists, and that he starts to do is this is stage number 2. In the summer of 1936, stage 2 is the purge of the NKVD. The NKVD was still full of the holdovers of the Bolsheviks, Dzerzhinsky people who worked with Lenin, who thought that the duty is to fight for communism and expose real counter-revolutionaries. And they, of course, were not the kind of people who would, torture the old Bolsheviks and make them confess about non-existent crimes. So this is why he gets rid of Yagoda, his old-time chief of the NKVD, and replaces him with Yezhov. And Yezhov is exactly the kind of person he needs, which is ready to kill as many as necessary without asking any questions. Moreover, it's a takeover NKVD, and tens of thousands of the former NKVD officials now are in camps, but more importantly, he creates the special departments that are accountable to his personal secretariat in all institutions of the Soviet Union. So that goes in all enterprises, in all factories, in the party committees, in the army, everywhere, and this would be his instruments for further terror as it unfolded. So stage 3 is March 1937. After purging the NKVD, he now is ready to attack the party, and that starts with the March plenum of the Central Committee, where he, looking in the faces of the Central Committee, the chosen leadership of the party, and he says, "You guys have to create 2 of your deputies who are really ready to take over what you're doing." So this is the opening salvo in his campaign against the party. Now, again, why is he doing that? It's one thing to attack the old intellectuals. Why does he need to replace the entire party? Why? The answer is very simple. These people had ideas of their own. They are used to discussing things, the meaning of Marxism and Trotskyism. Stalin does not need any intellectuals. He needs obedient servants. He wants the people who fulfill his orders, no matter what the orders are. He does not need this entire class. Moreover, and this is what he explained himself, he accuses him of being dvorushniki, which is double-faced. And the reason he's convinced that they're double-faced is because he was getting secret police reports on them, and this is what in my another video, and then he was reading his own weekly and monthly reports written by the Communist Party officials of a particular province. And he saw that they were lying because they were trying to present what they were doing in the best possible light. But the NKVD reports showed, they spied on everybody. They knew who said what in what kind of circumstances. They knew that they were talking about his leadership. They were talking about the routine platform. They knew that in 1932 they were all discussing the catastrophe of collectivization. He didn't need any of it. He wanted to replace them by cohorts. And that means in the typical province, there would be a party secretary and an NKVD, and they will be friends and buddies. So he wanted to cut it all through. Just basically, somebody is arrested, and then everybody he had worked with ever would be arrested as well. Army. The attack on the army takes place in the summer of 37 with the arrest of the top leadership of the army. And I'll give you just a few statistical data on this. So the total number of arrested army officers was 11,000. The total number of dismissed from their positions was 29,000. Now this affects the absolute top brass of the army command, and this is how it goes. From the division commanders in the Red Army in 1937, they were originally 201 division commanders. Of those, executed was 122. Now, marshals of the Soviet Union, which is the highest military rank one could get, there were 5. 2 of those were executed. Then the highest ranking officers, there were 767 that were arrested, and of those 472 were executed on the spot, and only 59 of them came back to serve later and regained their position, which means that the Red Army was totally decimated, and new cadres were replaced. A lot of times they were not very well educated, but that didn't matter. What mattered is that they owed their promotion to Stalin, and he replaced the army with his own men. I also think, this is my personal view, that the secret trials and the total decimation of the Red Army in just a matter of 2 months, in June and July 1937, may have something to do with some conversations that may have been going on among the army officers, that things are just going too far, that too many honest Bolsheviks are accused of treason and being Gestapo agents, and it's just not right. It's totally feasible to suggest that people could not just be silent about it and talked about it with their friends, and one of them would be denunciating them, and therefore it would reach Stalin, and then he would act accordingly and very swiftly. Some of the stories are just absolutely hair-raising, such as Marshal Tukhachevsky, one of the brightest stars of Russian army, one of the most talented. Not only he was arrested, but his brothers were arrested, his wife was arrested, his daughter was arrested, and I think she's the only one that survived. She was a child, and she was put in the camp for family members of the enemies of the people. So it was like a vendetta. It was not just the person, but it was his family that was attacked as well. And in many cases, wives were arrested, including, by the way, that of Molotov and of Kalinin, the top people in the Politburo. Well, look at the Politburo, which is the highest organ of the Communist Party. In 1934, there were 15 members, and I looked at their names, and here's the count. Of the 15 members, without Stalin, is 14 members. Of those 14 members, 7 were executed and 1 committed suicide. And here are the ones that either died by suspicious circumstances or were killed. So Kuibyshev, Kirov, Korsior, Ordzhonikidze, Postashev, Petrovsky, and Chubayev. Now, these people were members of the committee who were arrested, executed, and in case of Ordzhonikidze, after violent argument with Stalin, he shot himself. Now, of those that stayed, there were two that were real supporters of Stalin and executed all of his orders, which is Kaganovich and Molotov, and then a kind of a horseman, nobody who had no idea about military affairs, but served as a kind of a figurehead of the armies, Voroshilov. So these are the three that that Stalin truly worked with. Then there is the now to the interpretation. What is going on? How to explain this absolute madness or paranoia? Is this just because this is in the nature of communists to kill other people? Is this the nature of Marxism or Leninism? Some people argue. I'm a proponent of the theory that the best way to explain Stalin's actions is by reading Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince, where he says very clearly that a prince has to destroy everybody who is on his way. It makes perfect sense to get rid of the military and replace the military with your own, to replace the police and be absolutely sure that these are your people. And in some cases, what Machiavelli argues in his book, you have to replace the entire elite. And in one of his chapters, he explains how in the ancient times in one Greek island, the ruler killed the entire Senate and then ruled after that. It is known that Stalin admired Machiavelli. It was published in 1936 in the Russian translation. I think that makes perfect sense. The next thing he took from Machiavelli is this dictum of love and fear. A ruler, a prince, has to be feared. And that is what Stalin was. And he also has to be loved. Now, there was a cult of Stalin who was deliberately propagated. He deliberately gave to people who followed him apartments and privileges and cars and sanatoriums and good food and all kinds of things so that they know that if they love him, they will be safe. He gave a few perks to the intelligentsia, to the academicians, and those that were not in the camps so that they would be obedient servants. It was the same in literature and in theater and all kinds of other places. If you're obedient, if you pray praises to Stalin, if you love him, you survive. If you have critical ideas, you die. And in that sense, he's a good student of Machiavelli. And finally, one would say that Stalin's experience in the Great Terror proves one more time that Jefferson and Montesquieu were right. You must have division of power and balance of power. Stalin's terror is an example of what happens when you have one person who privatizes the state, when he takes over the state and subverts all institutions, the police, the inviolability of person, the law, the courts, the party. He basically becomes a tyrant in the most classical sense of Greek tragedy, that basically kills as many as he wants and nobody can stop him because there's no division of power. And in that sense, he is this kind of a traditional, classical, murderous despot. Thank you.